Welcome to a story of love that changed everything. A tale of two hearts finding their way back to a garden where the past and future were waiting to bloom. The scent of old paper and leather polish was Elara's favourite perfume. It was the smell of history, of stories settled into stillness. Here, in the climate-controlled quiet of the Westhaven City Museum's archives, she was the master of a silent kingdom. Rows of grey metal shelves stretched into the low-lit distance, each one a spine holding 1,000 fragile pages. Her desk, a large oak slab, rescued from the old city hall, was an island of meticulous order in the sea of history. On it, a single document lay beneath the gentle weight of archival snakes, a city charter from 1887, its ink faded to the colour of a pale brown tea. Her delicate touch, guided by a magnifying lamp, traced the elegant, looping script of a forgotten city clerk. This was her world. Predictable, peaceful, and profoundly satisfying. The past did not argue. It did not make sudden demands or change its mind. It simply was, and her job was to preserve its integrity. At 32, Elara had curated a life that mirrored her work. Her small apartment was neat and filled with second-hand books. Her routines were as catalogued as the artifacts she managed. She had friends, of course, but she cherished her solitude with the same reverence she held for a first edition. Her heart, she supposed, was just another artifact she kept carefully stored away, safe from the damaging effects of exposure. The gentle hum of the dehumidifier was the only sound, a constant, soothing drone that usually faded into the background. But today it was pierced by a sharp, alien noise. The insistent buzz of the intercom on her desk. She flinched, a minute tremor in the steady hand guiding a tiny brush. The intercom was reserved for emergencies, or for her director, Mr. Albright, who rarely ventured down to her subterranean domain. She pressed the button, her voice soft but clear. "This is Elara." "Elara, good morning," came Mr. Albright's reedy voice, tinny through the small speaker. "There is a gentleman here to see you, a Mr. Hayes. He has an appointment." Elara's brow furrowed. An appointment. She checked the pristine white page of her desk calendar. It was empty, just as she had left it last night. "I am sorry. There must be a mistake. I do not have any appointments today." A brief, muffled conversation came through the speaker. And then a new voice, a voice that did not belong in her quiet world, cut through the static. It was deeper, richer, with a current of easy confidence running through it. "Hi there. Elara. Liam Hayes. We spoke on the phone last week about the Centennial Gardens project." The name clicked into place, and a wave of annoyance washed over her. The phone call. He had been charming and fast-talking, throwing around terms like urban renewal and community engagement. She had politely but firmly directed him to the city planning department, explaining that the archives were for historical research, not commercial development queries. She had assumed that was the end of it. Apparently, she had assumed wrong. He had gone over her head, straight to Albright. "I remember the call, Mr. Hayes," she said, her tone cooling by several degrees. I believe I told you the planning department would have the zoning documents you need. You did, and you were right, he said, his voice maddeningly cheerful. But they are not what I am looking for. I need the originals. The historical plans, planting records, anything you have on the garden's inception. Mr. Albright said you were the person to talk to. There was no polite way to refuse a direct request funneled through her boss. With a sigh that was more internal than external, she relented. Fine. Send him down, Mr. Albright. She switched off the intercom and stood, smoothing the front of her simple grey dress. She felt a prickle of defensiveness, the instinct of a dragon whose hoard was about to be inspected by a stranger. Her archive was not a public library. The documents were delicate, some irreplaceable. They required careful handling and a deep respect she found lacking in most people, especially fast-talking developers. A few minutes later, the heavy metal door at the far end of the main aisle groaned open, letting in a slice of the museum's brighter, warmer light. And then he was there, and the first thing she noticed was that he was entirely too much for the space. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to shrink the towering shelves around him. His dark hair was a little unruly, as if he had just run his hands through it, and his eyes, a startlingly bright blue, were taking everything in with a quick, assessing gaze. He wore dark jeans and a simple black t-shirt under a worn leather jacket, a stark contrast to her own quiet attire. He looked like he belonged outdoors, in the sun and the wind, not in this place of controlled atmosphere and fragile paper. He strode toward her, his footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. The sound was an intrusion, a disruption of the sacred silence. He was smiling, a wide, easy grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Elara felt her professional guard go up, a shield of cool formality. Elara, he asked, his voice even more resonant in person. He extended a hand. Liam Hayes, it is great to finally put a face to the voice. She took his hand briefly. His grip was firm and warm, a startling contrast to the cool, dry air of the archive. Mr. Hayes, please, call me Liam, he said, his smile not wavering in the face of her reserve. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over the shelves with genuine interest. Wow. This place is incredible. It is like stepping back in time. We try to keep it that way, she replied, her tone clipped. Now, you said you were interested in the Centennial Gardens. What exactly are you looking for? She moved back toward her desk, creating a professional barrier between them. He followed, his presence seeming to take up all the available oxygen. He pulled a rolled-up set of modern blueprints from a tube slung over his shoulder and spread them across the one empty corner of her desk. Elara winced as the edge of the paper bumped against one of her archival weights. He did not seem to notice. This is the new plan, he said, his enthusiasm palpable. He pointed to different sections of the drawing. We are redeveloping the entire space. New pathways, a children's naturescape area here, a community vegetable garden over here, and a small amphitheatre for local performances. The idea is to make it a living, breathing part of the city again, not just a patch of grass people walk through to get somewhere else. Elara looked down at the blueprint. The elegant, symmetrical lines of the historic garden she knew were gone, replaced by swooping curves, asymmetrical blocks of green, and designated zones with corporate-sounding names. He was planning to erase it, all of it. The Centennial Garden was designed by Eleanor Vance, Elara said, her voice tight. She was one of the country's first prominent female landscape architects. Its design is a historically significant example of the garden-esque style. It is meant to be preserved, not bulldozed for a naturescape. Liam finally seemed to register her hostility. He looked up from the plans, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. I am not planning on bulldozing anything. I am trying to bring it back to life. No one uses that park, Elara. The fountain is cracked, the benches are rotting, and the flower beds are full of weeds. It is a sad, neglected space. Eleanor Vance was a visionary. She thinks she would want her creation to be ignored until it crumbled to dust. His argument was frustratingly logical. The park was neglected, but his solution felt like a violation. Its neglect is the city's fault, not the design's, she countered. The solution is restoration, not wholesale replacement. Restoration is part of the plan, he said, his tone patient, as if explaining something to a difficult child. That is why I am here. I want to understand the original intent. I want to see Vance's original drawings, her planting lists, her notes. I want to honour the history of the place, not erase it. But a garden from 1905 cannot serve a city in 2025 without some changes. We need accessibility. We need sustainability. We need spaces that bring people together. He was passionate. She had to give him that. It was not the cold corporate pitch she had expected. But his passion was for change, for the future. Hers was for the past, for preservation. They were standing on opposite sides of a philosophical divide, with the ghost of a century-old garden between them. She felt a headache beginning to form behind her eyes. The Vance collection is extensive. It contains preliminary sketches, formal blueprints, and correspondence. The paper is extremely fragile. It cannot be handled casually. I will be as careful as a surgeon, he promised, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. I just need to see them, to understand what she was thinking. Elara hesitated. Every instinct told her to protect the collection from this man, this force of nature who wanted to remake the world in his own image. But Mr. Albright had approved it, and a small, traitorous part of her was curious. She wanted to see his face when he saw the delicate beauty of Vance's original watercolours, the spidery script of her notes in the margins. Maybe if he saw them, he would understand. Maybe he would see that what he was proposing was a form of destruction. Very well, she said, her voice stiff. The protocol for viewing sensitive materials is as follows. You will be seated at a designated research table. You will be provided with cotton gloves. You may not bring anything to the table except a pencil and a notebook. No pens, no bags, no jackets. She eyed his leather jacket pointedly. And absolutely no beverages. I will bring the materials to you one folder at a time. You will be under my direct supervision at all times. Liam's smile returned, a slow, appreciative curve of his lips. Direct supervision. I think I can handle that. There was a hint of playful challenge in his tone that she chose to ignore. She led him to a small, bare table in an adjacent alcove, illuminated by a single, harsh, fluorescent light. It was where she put the rare researchers she could not deter. It was uncomfortable and sterile. He took off his jacket, draping it over the back of the chair, and sat down, looking perfectly at ease despite the stark surroundings. Elara retrieved a box of white cotton gloves from her desk and placed them in front of him. "Your hands, please." He held them out, and she was struck by them. They were strong, capable hands, with clean, short fingernails but a few faint calluses on the palms. They were the hands of someone who built things. He flexed his fingers as she looked at them. "Clean," he promised, a glint of amusement in his eyes. He pulled on the gloves, looking slightly ridiculous, like a mime preparing for a performance. She turned away, her cheeks feeling slightly warm, and walked toward the compact shelving that housed the architectural collections. She turned the large handle, and the shelves glided apart with a low hum, revealing a section labeled Vance, E. She located the oversized portfolio for the Centennial Garden project, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The weight of it was familiar and comforting. It was a tangible piece of a brilliant woman's mind. When she returned, she placed the portfolio on the table in front of him. She untied the simple ribbon holding it closed and opened the cover. The first page was a stunning watercolor rendering of the proposed garden. The colors were still remarkably vibrant. Deep emerald greens, soft pinks of imagined roses, the brilliant blue of the fountain's water. It was a masterpiece of design and artistry. Liam leaned forward, his earlier confidence replaced by a quiet reverence that surprised her. "Wow," he whispered, his voice hushed. "That is beautiful. I have only ever seen grainy black and white photos." "She painted it herself," Elara said, her voice softer than she intended. She believed that a plan should be a work of art in its own right, to properly convey the spirit of the place. He looked up at her, his blue eyes serious. She was right. For a moment, the friction between them dissolved. They were just two people, a century apart from the artist, admiring her work. In his gaze, she saw a flicker of the same awe she felt every time she opened this portfolio. He was not just a developer. He was someone who could see. She cleared her throat, breaking the spell, and retreated to her desk. From there, she could watch him. He was completely absorbed. He turned the pages with a slow, deliberate care that soothed her anxieties. He studied each drawing, each notation, his brow furrowed in concentration. He used his pencil to sketch in his notebook, not tracing, but making his own notes, interpreting the designs. An hour passed in comfortable silence, the only sounds the soft rustle of paper and the scratching of his pencil. It was a different kind of silence than her usual solitude. It was a shared quiet, focused and purposeful. It was, she was unsettled to admit, not entirely unpleasant. Finally he looked up, a thoughtful expression on his face. Her use of layered perspective is incredible. She designed the sightlines so that from any point in the garden you would have a different, perfectly framed view. It is brilliant. She was a genius, Elara agreed, finding herself drawn into the conversation against her better judgment. She wrote in her letters that a garden should be a series of gentle surprises. "Gentle surprises," he repeated, a smile touching his lips. "I like that." He looked at his own blueprints, then back at the Vance portfolio. "My plan, it is all about function, efficiency. It is loud." Was that a note of doubt in his voice? A flicker of hope ignited in her chest. "Her design has a function too," she pressed gently. Its function is to provide tranquility, a place for quiet contemplation. That is a valid function, is it not? He met her eyes across the room. The air between them seemed to hum with unspoken arguments and unexpected accord. Yes, he said slowly, it is. He worked for another hour before he finally started to pack up. He carefully placed the last drawing back in the portfolio and looked at her. Thank you, Elara. This has been more helpful than you can imagine. It is my job to preserve and provide access to the collection, she said, reverting to her formal script. No, I mean it, he insisted, pulling off the cotton gloves. He stood and walked toward her desk. You have given me a lot to think about. He leaned a hand on the edge of her desk, a casual gesture that nonetheless felt intimate in her carefully guarded space. I am going to need to come back. There is a lot here. Would tomorrow, same time, be okay? She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him to submit a formal research request, and she would see if she could fit him in next month. But the words would not come. His proximity was unnerving, a warm, solid presence that seemed to subtly alter the atmosphere of the room. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap mixed with the leather of his jacket. That should be acceptable, she managed to say. Great. His smile was back, bright and genuine. And maybe, could you tell me more about her? About Eleanor Vance? You obviously know a lot. Reading her letters and notes is one thing, but hearing it from someone who understands her, that would be invaluable. It was a clever tactic, appealing to her expertise, to her passion. He was asking her to be a partner in his research, not just a gatekeeper. He was inviting her in, and despite every warning bell in her head, she found she did not want to refuse. I can pull her correspondence for you, she said, a compromise. I would appreciate that, he said. He did not move for a moment, just held her gaze. So, I will see you tomorrow, Elara. He said her name as if it were a newly discovered word, testing its shape and sound. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps once again a confident echo in the silence. The heavy door groaned shut behind him, and she was alone again. But the silence was different. It felt emptier now, charged with the memory of his presence. Her archive, her sanctuary, suddenly felt less like a kingdom and more like a cage. She walked over to the research table where he had sat. A faint scent of him lingered in the air. She looked down at the Vance portfolio, her hand resting on the cover. He had seen the beauty in the plans. He had understood. But would he respect it? She returned to her desk and sat down, her eyes falling on the 1887 city charter she had been working on. The elegant, predictable script suddenly seemed lifeless. For the first time in a very long time, Elara felt the quiet stillness of her world not as a comfort, but as a profound and unsettling loneliness. A man who wanted to remake the world had walked into her carefully preserved past, and she had a terrifying feeling that nothing would ever be quite the same. The next morning, the archive did not feel the same. The next morning, the archive did not feel the same. The silence that had once been a comforting blanket now seemed thin, as if waiting to be broken. Elara found herself uncharacteristically distracted. She rearranged a stack of acid-free folders that were already perfectly aligned. She recalibrated the humidity sensor, which needed no recalibration. She even considered changing out of the simple navy blue sheath dress she had chosen that morning, wondering if it was too severe. The thought was so foreign, so utterly unlike her, that she stopped dead in the middle of an aisle, her hand hovering over a row of historical land deeds. She was being ridiculous. This was a professional consultation. Mr. Liam Hayes was a developer seeking historical context for a city-approved project. She was the museum archivist providing that context. It was simple, clinical, yet her stomach fluttered with a nervous energy she had not felt since her graduate school dissertation defense. She told herself it was anxiety over the fate of the Centennial Gardens, a purely academic concern for the preservation of a historical landmark. But she knew, in a quiet, unexamined corner of her mind, that it was more than that. It was him. He arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, just as he had said. The groan of the outer door was a herald, and she looked up, her hands clasped on the surface of her desk. He was carrying a cardboard tray with 2 large paper cups. The rich, dark aroma of fresh coffee preceded him, an olfactory invasion of her paper-scented world. "Good morning," he said, his smile just as wide and easy as it had been the day before. He placed the tray on the corner of her desk, pushing aside a meticulously ordered pile of request slips. I figured a peace offering was in order, or at least a caffeine-based lubricant for historical research. I am not sure which. One of these is black. The other has a little room for milk, just in case. I took a guess. Elara stared at the cups. No one ever brought her coffee. Her colleagues upstairs knew she preferred the bitter black tea she brewed herself every morning. Visitors, the few she had, were too intimidated by the rules to even think of bringing in a beverage. This small, presumptuous gesture felt like a breach of a dozen protocols, both written and unwritten. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. But food and drink are strictly forbidden in the archive," she said, her voice stiff with practiced authority. He did not look chastened, he just grinned. "Right. Of course. Rules." He picked up one of the cups. "Well, I will leave yours here. You can take it up to your office for a break later. Or..." He leaned in a little, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You can drink it when the scary archivist is not looking." A small, traitorous bubble of laughter rose in her chest, and she had to press her lips together to keep it from escaping. He was impossible, and he had correctly guessed she drank her coffee black. She pointed toward the research alcove. "The correspondence you requested is on the table." He gave a mock salute and headed to the table, leaving the coffee on her desk like a ticking time bomb of temptation. She watched him for a moment, then took the cup and placed it on a filing cabinet just outside the archive's main door. A compromise. She brought the first box of Eleanor Vance's letters to him. They were tied in bundles with faded silk ribbon, the paper thin and brittle, covered in an elegant, almost indecipherable script. "Her handwriting is a challenge," Elara said, setting the box down carefully. She wrote quickly, as if she were trying to catch the thoughts before they escaped. "A woman in a hurry," Liam murmured, pulling on the cotton gloves. He picked up a letter, handling it with the same surprising gentleness as the day before. He squinted at the page. "My dearest sister," he read slowly. "The city council is populated by fools and Philistines. They see a budget line for soil and seed, and they imagine it an extravagance. They cannot comprehend that a space for beauty is as vital to the human soul as a sewer line is to the human..." Well, you know. Liam laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to warm the cool air. I like her. I like her. I think we would have gotten along. She would have found your plans for an amphitheatre appalling, Elara countered, though without the sharp edge of the previous day. Maybe, he conceded, not looking up from the letter. Or maybe she would have been thrilled that people were going to gather in her garden to listen to music, that it was a living space, not just a pretty picture. They fell into a rhythm. He would read passages aloud, stumbling over the looping script, and she, knowing the letters almost by heart, would supply the words he could not decipher. They pieced together the story of the garden's creation not from blueprints and planting charts, but from the words of the woman who had willed it into being. They read of her battles for funding, her frustration with suppliers who sent the wrong species of rosebush, and her sheer, unadulterated joy on the day the fountain was first turned on. Through her letters, Eleanor Vance emerged from the mists of history, not as a sainted icon of landscape architecture, but as a real person, stubborn, passionate, witty, and fiercely protective of her vision. "Listen to this," Liam said, his voice hushed with discovery. He read from a letter dated April 1904. "I had a dream of the garden last night. I was an old woman sitting on a bench near the wisteria arbor. The leaves were gold with autumn, and a young couple walked by, their hands clasped. They did not see me. They were lost in their own world, and the garden was their sanctuary. It was for them, I realized. Not for me. Not for the city fathers. For all the lovers yet to come. It is this feeling I must build." He looked up at Elara, his blue eyes intense. She was not just designing a park. She was designing a feeling. "Yes," Elara whispered, her throat suddenly tight. That was the line. That was the sentence that had first made her fall in love with Eleanor Vance's work, that had made her choose this quiet life, dedicating herself to preserving such feelings. And he had found it. He understood. "That is what is missing," he said, more to himself than to her. He gestured toward his blueprint tube, which was leaning against the table leg. "My plan has features. It has zones. It does not have a soul. It is not designed for lovers." Elara's heart gave a strange, hopeful leap. "It is not too late," she said, her voice barely audible. He looked at her, and for a long moment, the letters and the blueprints and the century between them and Eleanor Vance all faded away. There was only the quiet hum of the archive and the charged space between their eyes. He was seeing her, she realized, not just as the scary archivist, but as someone who understood. He broke the gaze first, clearing his throat and looking down at the letters again. "Tell me more about her. What happened to her after the garden was finished?" And so Elara talked. She told him how Eleanor Vance had gone on to design dozens of other parks and private estates, but that she had always referred to the Centennial Garden as her heart project. She told him how Vance had never married, pouring all of her passion into her work. She told him how she had continued to visit the garden, a quiet, anonymous old woman, just as she had seen in her dream. Elara's voice, usually reserved for professional recitations of facts, was filled with a warmth and animation that surprised even herself. She was sharing something she loved, and he was listening with a focused intensity that made her feel seen. After another hour, he finally rolled out his own plans again. But this time, they were not the finished blueprints from the day before. They were fresh sheets of drafting paper covered in charcoal sketches. "I was up half the night," he confessed, a slightly sheepish look on his face. He pointed to a section of the drawing. "Okay. So, what if we keep the amphitheatre, but instead of a modern concrete structure, we make it a grass-covered, terraced bowl, almost like an ancient Greek theatre? It would be organic, part of the landscape, not an imposition on it." He looked at her, waiting for her verdict. It was a good idea, a much better idea. "And the main fountain," he continued, his enthusiasm growing. "It needs to be restored, absolutely. But what if the new pathways do not just lead to it, but radiate from it, like ripples in a pond? So it remains the heart of the park, just as she intended." He picked up a charcoal pencil. "And the naturescape. That was a stupid name. What if instead we restore her original wisteria arbor here and create a children's discovery garden tucked away behind it? A gentle surprise." He was using her words. He was using Eleanor's words. He was sketching furiously, his hand moving with a confident grace. He was trying. He was really, truly trying to bridge the gap between his world and hers. Elara moved closer, standing beside his chair, her earlier defensiveness completely gone, replaced by a cautious but genuine engagement. "The original arbor had benches set into the alcoves," she said softly, pointing to a spot on his sketch. "So people could sit in the shade, surrounded by the scent of the blossoms." "Yes, that is perfect," he said, quickly sketching in the benches. Their shoulders were almost touching. She could feel the warmth radiating from him. His focus was entirely on the paper, but she was acutely aware of his nearness. The air crackled. She took a half step back, creating a space that felt both necessary and like a loss. Just then, the intercom buzzed, making them both jump. It was Mr. Albright. "Elara, is Mr. Hayes still with you?" "Yes, I am here, Mr. Albright," Liam answered, leaning over her desk to press the button. "Ah, good. Liam, I just had a call from Councilwoman Miller. She is asking for an updated timeline. The groundbreaking is still tentatively scheduled for the end of the month, and she is getting anxious for a finalized plan she can present to the board. I told her you were making excellent progress." The subtext was clear. Stop making progress and start making a decision. "Understood," Liam said, his voice tight with a frustration that had not been there a moment before. "Tell her I will have something for her by the end of the week." He switched off the intercom and ran a hand through his hair, the easy charm momentarily gone, replaced by a look of intense pressure. "End of the month. They are insane." "It is a political project," Elara said quietly. "It is about the next election, not the next generation." He looked at her, a wry, tired smile on his face. "You really are a historian, are you not?" He started to roll up his sketches. The collaborative energy had been broken, replaced by the harsh reality of deadlines and city politics. He packed his things in silence. When he was ready to go, he stood by her desk, his leather jacket slung over his shoulder. "This is not going to work," he said, his voice low and serious. Me, down here in the quiet, trying to understand. You, up here, wherever you go when you leave, with your knowledge. I am looking at these drawings, and you are looking at this ghost. I am trying to see what you see, but I cannot. Not completely. Elara's heart sank. She thought they had been making progress. I am trying to see your perspective as well. I know you are, he said, and his eyes softened. But it is not enough. There is only one way this is going to work. He took a step closer. Come to the garden with me. Walk me through it. Do not tell me about it. Show me. Show me the sight lines Eleanor Vance designed. Show me where the lovers were meant to walk. I need to see the place through your eyes. The request hung in the air between them, feeling both momentous and terrifyingly simple. Leaving the archive, her controlled environment, to walk with him through the very real, very neglected space they were fighting over, was a step into his world. It was a step toward something else. It was no longer a consultation. It was an invitation. All the reasons to say no paraded through her mind. It was unprofessional. It was outside the scope of her duties. It would blur the line between archivist and something else. She had spent a decade building these walls around her life, and he was asking her to walk right out the door. But then she thought of Eleanor Vance's dream, of the garden as a sanctuary. She thought of Liam's frustrated passion, his genuine attempt to understand, to design a feeling. To say no would be to protect her solitude, but it might condemn the garden to a soulless renovation. To say yes, she was not sure what that meant, but it felt like the only choice that held any life. Okay, she heard herself say, the word a small, quiet sound in the vast silence of the archive. Yes, I will meet you there. The air outside the museum was a chaotic symphony of sounds and smells that felt alien to Elara. The rumble of a passing bus, the distant wail of a siren, the smell of street vendor hot dogs. It was a sensory assault after the monastic quiet of her archive. She pulled her light trench coat tighter around herself, feeling exposed and untethered without her shelves of silent history to anchor her. The Centennial Garden was only a few blocks away, but she walked slowly, her sensible flats clicking nervously on the pavement. She had not been to the garden in years. In her mind it existed as Eleanor Vance's perfect watercolour rendering, a place of vibrant, ordered beauty. She knew, intellectually, that the reality was different, but she had avoided confronting the decay, preferring the pristine version that lived on paper. Now, she had no choice. She entered through the main gate, where one of the original wrought-iron arches, shaped like intertwined rose stems, was rusted through in several places. The sight sent a pang of sorrow through her. Before her lay not a sanctuary, but a ghost. The grand central pathway, designed for promenades, was a mosaic of cracked paving stones and determined weeds. The great lawn was patchy and overgrown, and the flower beds were choked with dandelions. It was a place that had been forgotten by the city, a testament to neglect. And yet, beneath the decay, the bones of Eleanor's design were still there. The graceful curve of the paths, the stately placement of the ancient oak trees, the faint outline of what was once a magnificent rose garden. It was a sad, beautiful ruin. Liam was waiting for her by the cracked, silent fountain at the centre of the park. He was leaning against its stone basin, his hands in the pockets of his jeans, looking completely at home amidst the gentle chaos of nature. He was not wearing his leather jacket today, just a simple grey Henley that stretched across his shoulders. He saw her, and his face broke into that familiar, easy smile. "Hey," he said, pushing himself off the fountain. "Glad you came." "I said I would," Elara replied, her voice a little breathless from the walk and her own anxiety. She stopped a few feet away from him, clutching the strap of her leather satchel like a shield. "It is worse than I thought," he said, his gaze sweeping across the park. His tone was not triumphant or smug, but genuinely regretful. "Photos do not do the sadness justice, do they?" "No," she agreed quietly. "They do not." An awkward silence fell between them. The context was gone. There was no desk to stand behind, no formal protocol to enforce. It was just the two of them, a man and a woman, standing in a forgotten garden. "So," Liam began, breaking the quiet. "School is in session, Professor Elara. The garden is yours. Show me what I am not seeing." The light, teasing tone helped. It gave her a role to play. She took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and wild grass filling her lungs, and channeled the archivist she knew how to be. "All right. The first thing you need to understand is that nothing in this garden is accidental. Eleanor Vance designed it as a narrative, a journey. You were meant to enter here." She gestured back toward the rusted gate, "and be drawn immediately to the fountain. It is the heart, the central point from which everything else flows." She began to walk, and after a moment's hesitation, he fell into step beside her. "The main paths are wide, you see. They were for public life, for seeing and being seen. But the magic of the garden is in the secondary paths, the ones that branch off." She led him away from the main walkway, onto a narrower, almost hidden dirt path that snaked away behind a thicket of overgrown rhododendrons. The noise of the city immediately faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the chatter of sparrows. "These were the paths for contemplation," she explained, her confidence growing as she spoke about what she knew. "For lovers," she added, the word feeling strange on her tongue. Vance called them ribbons of retreat. She wanted you to feel as if you were discovering a secret place. The path opened into a small circular clearing. In the centre stood a stone bird bath, green with moss and filled with dark, stagnant rainwater. From this spot you can't see any other path. You are entirely enclosed by the foliage. It is one of her gentle surprises. A room made of leaves. Liam looked around, his architect's eye taking in the dimensions and the structure of the space. She created intimacy with nothing but plants. It is brilliant. He looked at her, his expression serious. I would have just put a sign that said quiet zone. Elara almost smiled. She was more subtle than that. They continued to walk. She showed him how Vance had used a row of tall cypress trees to hide the view of a nearby factory, and how she had planted a specific grove of birch trees where their white bark would catch the afternoon sun. Elara pointed out a stone bench, half swallowed by ivy, that was perfectly positioned to view the sunset through a gap in the trees. With every step, with every story she told, the garden began to transform around them. It was no longer just a place of decay. Through her words, Liam began to see the vibrant, living place it was meant to be. He was an excellent student. He did not just listen. He asked questions. Why this type of stone? Why plant the lilacs so close to the mock orange? So their blooming seasons would overlap, she explained. For 2 weeks in late spring, this path would have been an absolute explosion of fragrance. She designed for all the senses. At one point, the path was blocked by a large fallen branch. Before Elara could navigate around it, Liam was there, offering his hand. Here, let me help you over. His hand was warm and strong, just as it had been in the archive. She hesitated for only a second before taking it. His grip was firm, sending a startling jolt of electricity up her arm. He helped her step easily over the log. On the other side, their hands lingered together for a beat longer than necessary before she gently pulled away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Thank you," she murmured, avoiding his eyes. They came to what was once the wisteria arbor. The wooden structure had long since collapsed into a heap of rotting timber, but the wisteria vine itself had survived. It had grown into a monstrous, gnarled thing, climbing up a nearby oak tree in a cascade of thick, woody tendrils. "This is it," Elara said, her voice soft with reverence. This is where she dreamed she saw the lovers. Liam reached out and touched one of the thick, twisted vines. It is still alive. It is a survivor. He looked at the wreckage of the arbor, then back to the vine. We could rebuild the structure around it. Hey, we could save it. It would take a lot of work, she said, thinking of budgets and city permits. Good things usually do, he replied. And he was not looking at the vine anymore. He was looking at her. The air grew thick and quiet, the space between them shrinking, until she could feel the heat of his body, smell the faint, clean scent of his laundry detergent, mixed with the earthy smell of the park. She felt a powerful, dizzying urge to close the remaining distance, to see what would happen if she did. It was Liam who broke the spell. He cleared his throat and took a step back, gesturing toward a dilapidated corner of the park. What was over there? My plans just show it as empty space. Shaken, Elara gathered her professional composure. That was the children's garden. It was considered very innovative for its time. It had child-sized benches and a shallow pond for sailing toy boats. She led him toward it, grateful for the motion. As they drew closer, they could hear a faint, rhythmic sound. Thump-thump, whack, thump-thump, whack. They rounded a corner and saw a small, elderly woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat, methodically hitting a tennis ball against a crumbling brick wall with a worn racket. She had a small garden trowel and a bucket next to her. "Mrs. Gable," Elara said, a genuine smile finally breaking through her reserve. "I thought I might find you here." The old woman stopped and squinted at them, her face a road map of wrinkles. "Elara, goodness, child, I have not seen you in this garden in an age." Her eyes flicked to Liam, her gaze sharp and appraising. "Who is this?" "This is Liam Hayes," Elara said. "He is an architect working with the city on the gardens. Revitalization. Revitalization," Mrs. Gable repeated, the word sounding like a potential insult. "Is that what they are calling it now? Last time it was reimagining. Before that, repurposing. Sounds a lot like destroying to me." She turned her sharp gaze on Liam. "Are you going to tear down my wall, Mr. Hayes?" Liam looked at the crumbling brick wall, then back at the formidable old woman. No, Mum. I had no plans to. Good, she sniffed. Eleanor Vance put this wall here for a reason. It blocks the wind. It is a perfect backboard. I have been playing tennis against this wall since I was a girl. My father taught me right here. She gestured with her racket to the weed-filled plot of land at their feet. And this was my mother's favourite spot. She volunteered to tend the pansies here. I have been trying to keep them clear, she said, pointing to a few brave pansies blooming amidst the weeds. But my back is not what it used to be. Mrs. Gable was the living history of the place. She was the memory of the garden made flesh. She had played here as a child, perhaps even courted her husband here. She was one of the people Eleanor Vance had dreamed of. Ma'am, Liam said, his voice gentle and respectful. My name is Liam. What if I told you we could fix this wall for you? And that we could replant this entire bed with the best pansies money can buy? Would you be willing to tell me your stories about this place? Tell me what it was like when it was alive. Mrs. Gable stared at him for a long, silent moment. She looked from his earnest face to Elara's, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. Well now, she said, her tone softening. That is the most sensible thing a man with a blueprint has ever said to me. She looked at Elara. This one is different from the others, is not he? Elara felt a blush creep up her neck. He is listening. They spent the next hour with Mrs. Gable. She told them stories of May Day festivals held on the Great Lawn, of ice skating on the frozen fountain in the winter, of her first kiss on the bench by the sunset view. She gave them a tour far more real and vital than Elara's. She showed them the garden not as a historical artifact, but as a beloved home filled with a lifetime of memories. As she spoke, Liam took out his notebook. However, he was not sketching structures or pathways. He was writing down her words. May Day Festival. Sunset bench. Pansy bed. He was not designing a park anymore. He was trying to rebuild a home. Finally, Mrs. Gable announced that her knees were telling her it was time for tea. She patted Liam's arm. You come back and see me, young man. We will talk some more. Then she gave Elara a sly wink and shuffled off down the path. Liam and Elara stood in silence for a moment, the sound of Mrs. Gable's tennis ball replaced by the gentle sigh of the wind in the trees. She is the key, Liam said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. It is not just about Eleanor Vance's original vision. It is about the life that was lived here, the memories that are embedded in the soil. Any new plan has to honour that. It has to make room for new memories while protecting the old ones. He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a light she had not seen before. Not just passion, but a deep, resonant understanding. Thank you, Elara. You brought me here to see a ghost. But you and Mrs. Gable, you have shown me its heart. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The air grew cooler. It was time to go, to return to their separate worlds. But neither of them moved. I was wrong about you, Elara said, the admission costing her a piece of her carefully constructed pride. I thought you just wanted to impose your own vision on this place. I thought you did not care about the past. The past was just a bunch of black and white photos to me until I met you, he confessed, his voice low. You made it real. He took a step closer. The cautious distance they had maintained all afternoon evaporated. He reached out, not to take her hand, but to gently brush a stray leaf from her hair. His fingers grazed her temple, a touch as light as a whisper, but it sent a shockwave through her entire system. She forgot how to breathe. His hand dropped, but he did not move away. His gaze fell to her lips. The world seemed to slow down, to narrow to the few inches of charged air between them. He was going to kiss her. She was sure of it. And the most terrifying part was, she wanted him to. She leaned in, a barely perceptible motion, a silent consent. And then his phone rang. The shrill electronic sound shattered the moment. They sprang apart like startled deer. Liam fumbled in his pocket, a curse under his breath. He glanced at the screen, and the open, vulnerable expression on his face was instantly replaced by a guarded mask of professionalism. "I have to take this," he said, his voice strained. "It is the councilwoman." He turned away from her, walking a few paces off as he answered the call. "Miller. Hi. Yes, I am at the site now. Look, we need to talk about the timeline." Elara stood frozen, her hand touching the spot on her temple where his fingers had been. Her body was thrumming with an energy that had nowhere to go. The spell was broken. The real world, with its deadlines and its politics, had intruded once again. She watched him on the phone, saw the tension in his shoulders, the frustrated way he paced back and forth. He was part of that world, a world of conflict and compromise she had spent her life avoiding. And she was part of this world, a world of quiet and memory. Today, they had met in the middle. But could they stay there? He finished the call and walked back to her, a deep line etched between his brows. "I am sorry," he said. "She is pushing for a public presentation next week." "That is fast," Elara said, her voice hollow. "That is politics," he countered, though the fire was gone from his voice, replaced by a weary resignation. "Look, I have to go. I have to redraft everything. All of this," he gestured to the garden around them, "changes everything." "Yes," she said, "it does." They walked to the gate together in a new, more complicated silence. The easy camaraderie of the afternoon was gone, replaced by the weight of what had almost happened and the pressure of what was to come. At the rusted archway, he stopped and turned to her. "Elara, about what just happened, before the phone call." She held up a hand, stopping him. She did not know what she was more afraid of, that he would apologize for it, or that he would try to explain it away. "You have a presentation to prepare for, Mr. Hayes. You should focus on that." The formal address was a deliberate step back, a retreat to the safety of her professional role. She saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes before it was replaced by a resigned nod. "Right, of course." He paused, as if he wanted to say more, but in the end he just said, "I will see you at the archive. I will need to look at the original construction specs." "I will have them ready for you," she said. And then he was gone, striding down the street with his long, confident gait, leaving her alone in the twilight of the dying garden. She reached up and touched the rusted iron of the gate, the cold, rough texture a stark contrast to the memory of his warm hand. She had stepped out of her quiet world today, and in doing so, had opened the door to a chaotic, exhilarating, and terrifying new feeling. She had no idea how she would ever close it again. The days that followed their walk in the garden blurred into a single, sustained stretch of intense collaboration. The archive, once Elara's solitary kingdom, transformed into a shared headquarters, a war room for the salvation of the centennial garden. The sterile research alcove became Liam's command centre. His charcoal sketches and new blueprints were taped carefully to the metal end caps of the shelves, a modern intrusion on the rows of silent history. The scent of old paper now mingled with the crisp, woody smell of his drafting pencils and the faint, persistent aroma of the coffee he brought her each morning. He learned, after the first day, not to place it on her desk. Instead, he would leave it just outside the main door on the filing cabinet, and she would retrieve it when she thought he was not looking. It became a silent ritual, a small, shared conspiracy against the rules that had once defined her world. The line between their professional roles softened, then all but disappeared. He was no longer just a developer, and she was no longer just the archivist. They were partners. He would sketch an idea, a new, curving bench that mimicked the flow of a path, and she would pull Eleanor Vance's original notebooks to show him how Vance herself had designed railings based on the unfurling of a fern frond. He brought his architectural expertise, his understanding of materials and load-bearing capacities, and she brought the soul of the place, the historical and emotional context that gave the plans meaning. "What about paving stones?" he asked on the second day, tapping his pencil against a drawing of the main promenade. "The council wants cheap, interlocking concrete. It is durable, low maintenance. It is also soulless," Elara countered immediately, not even looking up from a fragile 1905 nursery catalogue she was examining. Vance specified local bluestone. She chose it for the way the colour changes in the rain, from pale grey to a deep, shimmering blue-black. "Bluestone is 3 times the cost," Liam sighed, running a hand through his already messy hair. "Miller will have a fit. Then find a compromise," Elara said, finally meeting his gaze. "Use the bluestone for the central plaza, around the fountain. Make it the heart of the garden, just like Vance did. Use a more cost-effective material for the secondary paths, something that complements the stone, not fights with it." He looked at her, then back at his drawing, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That is good. That is really good." He began sketching furiously. A hierarchy of materials. It adds to the narrative. The public spaces are grounded in history. The private ones are simpler. Elara felt a flush of pride. She was not just protecting the past. She was helping to shape the future. The feeling was heady, addictive. Their lunches became another ritual. On the first day, he had disappeared at noon and returned with 2 large paper bags from a nearby delicatessen. He had unpacked them on the small, cleared corner of her desk. A thick turkey sandwich for him. A lighter caprese salad for her. A choice he had somehow guessed correctly. She had protested, citing the rules, but her objection was half-hearted at best. It was easier to give in than to admit how much she enjoyed the quiet company, the simple act of sharing a meal. They talked as they ate, their conversation drifting from the project to other things. She learned he had grown up in a small town upstate, the son of a carpenter, and had spent his childhood building elaborate tree houses. He learned she had been raised in the city by a grandmother who took her to museums every weekend, planting the seeds of her love for the past. They were sketching out the blueprints of each other's lives, finding the points of intersection. The pressure from the outside world was a constant, looming threat. Councilwoman Miller called Liam's cell phone at least twice a day. Elara could only hear his side of the conversations, but it was enough. His voice would grow tight, his posture rigid, the easy warmth draining from his face. No, the budget is not finalized because the plan is not finalized. Yes, I understand the deadline. Because it has to be right, not just fast. No, I have not forgotten the donors' requests for naming opportunities. After one particularly tense call, he hung up and stared blankly at the plans, his jaw tight. She wants to put a corporate logo on a plaque by the fountain, he said, his voice flat with disgust. Eleanor Vance would rise from her grave and haunt her, Elara said, her tone fierce. Liam looked at her, and the tension in his face eased, replaced by a look of profound gratitude. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For getting it. For being on my side. I feel like we are in this little bubble down here, and every time the phone rings, someone is trying to pop it. He was right. It did feel like a bubble, a world of their own making, suspended in the quiet depths of the museum. The rest of the world, with its politics and its compromises, was a distant noise. Down here, all that mattered was the integrity of their work, the shared goal of creating something beautiful and true, and, Elara was beginning to admit to herself, all that mattered was the quiet joy of being near him. She was becoming attuned to him in a way that was both unnerving and deeply thrilling. She knew the way he chewed on the end of his pencil when he was deep in thought. She knew the specific shade of blue his eyes turned when he was excited about an idea. She knew that when he was stressed, a small muscle in his jaw would tick. These small, intimate details wove themselves into the fabric of her days, as much a part of her environment as the smell of old paper. One evening, they worked late, long after the museum above them had closed and fallen silent. The only light came from her desk lamp and the single fluorescent bulb in his alcove, creating pools of warmth in the vast, surrounding darkness. They were hunched over the final presentation board, a large foam core panel that showed a stunning watercolour-style rendering of their new plan, a design Liam had painstakingly painted himself, inspired by Eleanor Vance's originals. "It is finished," he said, his voice hushed with a mixture of exhaustion and awe. He straightened up, stretching his back. "We did it." Elara looked at the board. It was a masterpiece of compromise and inspiration. The historic heart of the garden was preserved, the sightlines and gentle surprises intact. But it was also a design for the future, with its accessible pathways, its organic grass amphitheatre, and its lovingly restored children's garden, which they had officially named Mrs. Gable's Pansy Patch. It was a plan that had a soul. "It is beautiful, Liam," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She would have loved it. The professional partnership that had defined their week fell away, leaving only the man and the woman who had stood in a twilight garden, on the verge of a kiss. He was closer than she had realized, so close she could see the flecks of grey in his blue eyes and the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. "I could not have done it without you, Elara," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You are the soul of this project." He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently tucked a stray strand of her hair behind her ear. His touch was feather light, but it burned a trail along her skin. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a fraction of a second. The world narrowed to this single point of contact, to the warmth of his fingers against her cheek. "Elara," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her with a raw, unguarded intensity that stole her breath. This was it. The moment she had been simultaneously dreading and longing for all week. There was no phone to ring, no interruption to save them. There was only the charged silence and the undeniable pull that drew them closer. He lowered his head, his gaze dropping to her lips. She could feel his breath on her skin, warm and soft. Her own lips parted in silent invitation. The world seemed to hold its breath. But then he stopped. He was inches away, so close, but he stopped. She saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes, a battle being waged behind their blue depths. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his strength, and then he took a small, deliberate step back. The connection shattered, leaving the air cold and empty. "I cannot," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He would not meet her eyes. He looked at the presentation board, at the floor, at anything but her. Confusion and a sharp, stinging wave of rejection washed over Elara. She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive posture she had not realized she had abandoned. I do not understand." He finally looked at her, his face a mask of regret. "This project, it is everything right now. The presentation is in 2 days. It is the fight of my professional life. And you are the most important part of it. You are my partner, my expert. I will not risk messing that up. I will not risk making you uncomfortable or blurring a boundary that I might not be able to unblur." He was trying to be noble. He was trying to be professional and respectful. But all Elara heard was the distance in his words. The boundary he was so carefully drawing was a wall going up between them, just when she had finally started to feel safe enough to step outside of her own. "I see," she said, and the coldness in her voice surprised even herself. She turned away, busying herself by arranging a stack of books that were already perfectly straight. "You are right. It would be unprofessional. We have a presentation to focus on." "Elara, that is not what he started, taking a step toward her. "It is late," she cut him off, her back still to him. "We should go. We need to be rested for the meeting." The silence that followed was heavy and painful. She heard him sigh, a sound of pure frustration. "Okay," he said softly. "You are right." They packed up their things in a silence that was a universe away from the comfortable quiet they had shared just minutes before. It was a silence filled with unspoken words, with the ghost of a moment that had passed, with the sudden, jarring reality of the boundaries he had so honorably and so painfully erected between them. He walked with her to the heavy archive door. Under the harsh glare of the main corridor lights, they looked like strangers again. "I will see you tomorrow," he said, his voice strained. "Tomorrow," she echoed, not looking at him. He hesitated for a second, then turned and walked away down the long, empty hall. Elara watched him go until he disappeared around a corner. She leaned back against the cold metal door, the silence of her archive rushing back in to reclaim her. But it brought no comfort. She had let him into her world, and in doing so, had opened herself up to a feeling she had not experienced in years, a profound and aching vulnerability. He had drawn a line between them to protect the project, but in doing so, he had left her feeling more alone than she had ever felt when she was truly by herself. The morning of the presentation, The air in the archive was cold and brittle. The easy warmth that had filled the space during their collaboration had vanished, replaced by a stilted, painful professionalism. Liam arrived early, not with coffee, but with a grim set to his jaw and dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a muted grey tie. The architect was back. The soft edges of the man who sketched in gardens sanded away, replaced by the hard lines of a businessman preparing for a fight. Elara, too, had retreated into her uniform. She wore a severe black dress, her hair pulled back into a tight, unforgiving bun. She had become the archivist again, a custodian of facts, a silent partner. They barely spoke as they packed the presentation board and a box of supporting documents. Every necessary word was clipped, precise, and devoid of emotion. Every accidental brush of their hands as they manoeuvred the large board out of the archive felt like a static shock, a reminder of the energy that had been so abruptly cut off between them. The city council chamber was an exercise in bland intimidation. It was a cavernous, wood-panelled room with poor acoustics and fluorescent lighting that cast a sickly pallor on everyone present. Councilwoman Miller sat at the centre of the dais, a formidable figure in a power-red suit, her expression already telegraphing a deep and abiding skepticism. Mr. Albright was there, wringing his hands and offering them a weak, nervous smile. A handful of other council members were scattered along the long, curved table, looking bored. In the first row of the public seating area sat the potential donors, a group of stern-faced business leaders who looked as though their time was being profoundly wasted. Liam set up the presentation board on an easel at the front of the room. He moved with a practiced, efficient confidence, but Elara, who had spent the last week studying his every gesture, could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the tightness in his hands as he adjusted the easel. He was nervous. He was preparing to compromise. "We will begin with Mr. Hayes outlining the proposed revitalization plan," Mr. Albright said, his voice trembling slightly. "He will then be supported by Miss Sterling from the museum, who can speak to the historical precedents of the design." Supported. The word felt like a demotion. She was not his partner. She was a supporting feature, a historical footnote. She took her seat in a chair placed slightly behind and to the side of the easel, an accessory to the main event. Liam began to speak. His voice was strong, his delivery polished. He started with the budget, with the timeline, with the practicalities. He spoke of durable materials, of low-maintenance landscaping, of improved traffic flow and ADA compliance. He was speaking the council's language, the language of pragmatism and fiscal responsibility. He highlighted the amphitheatre, the improved lighting, the potential for revenue-generating events. The plan he described was competent, logical, and utterly devoid of the soul they had worked so hard to uncover. He had not once mentioned Eleanor Vance's name. Elara sat frozen in her chair, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. This was not their plan. This was a hollowed-out, sanitized version, stripped of its poetry and passion to make it more palatable for the politicians. She watched Liam point to the rendering, to the beautiful watercolour that held all of their shared ideas, and describe it in the driest possible terms. He was letting it die before it even had a chance to live. "And now," Liam said, turning slightly toward her, "I would like to introduce Elara Sterling, the museum's archivist, who can confirm the historical accuracy of some of the design elements. He was handing it over to her, but he had given her nothing to work with. He had laid a foundation of concrete and budgets, and she was supposed to sprinkle a little historical dust on top. Before she could even stand, Councilwoman Miller leaned into her microphone, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for that overview. And before we get into the historical curiosities, I have some concerns about the budget. This line item for bluestone paving seems particularly extravagant. I have a quote here for standard concrete pavers that comes in at a third of the cost." "The bluestone is a key feature, Councilwoman," Liam said, his voice strained. "It maintains the integrity of the original central plaza. The integrity of a plaza nobody has used in 50 years. Miller shot back with a thin, humorless smile. "And this wisteria arbor reconstruction, is it truly necessary to spend city funds rebuilding a rotten pile of wood?" "The vine is still alive," Liam said, his voice faltering slightly. "It is one of the original plantings from 1904. We felt it was important to—" "Mr. Hayes," Miller cut him off, her voice hardening. "The purpose of this project is to create a functional, modern public space for the citizens of today, not to build a museum piece for a handful of history buffs. The donors," she gestured to the stone-faced group in the front row, "are investing in the future of this city, not its past. With all due respect to Ms. Sterling, her involvement seems to have added a great deal of expense and very little practical value." The attack was direct, personal, and profoundly unfair. Elara felt the blood rush to her face. She looked at Liam, expecting him to defend her, to defend their work. But he was wavering. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the developer at war with the man who had sat in a forgotten garden and listened to the stories of an old woman. "We can certainly look at more cost-effective alternatives," Liam began, and the words were a physical blow to Elara. He was giving in. He was sacrificing the heart of their plan on the altar of political expediency. And in that moment, something inside Elara snapped. The quiet, reserved archivist, who lived by the rules, who protected herself with silence and solitude, receded. In her place rose the woman who had fiercely defended Eleanor Vance's legacy to a handsome, infuriating architect, the woman who had felt a kinship with a stubborn, passionate ghost. She would not let this happen. She would not stand by and watch them pave over a dream. She stood up. "Councilwoman," Elara said, her voice ringing out with a clarity and strength that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "You are right. This project is not for history buffs." All eyes turned to her. Liam stared, his mouth slightly agape. Councilwoman Miller raised a skeptical eyebrow. "It is not for us," Elara continued, stepping forward from behind the easel to stand beside Liam, to reclaim her place as his partner. "It is for the lovers." A confused murmur went through the room. In April of 1904, a month before construction on the garden began, Eleanor Vance wrote a letter to her sister. She had been fighting with the city council of her day. A council much like this one, populated by practical people who saw beauty as an extravagance. She looked directly at Miller, her gaze unwavering. She wrote, "I had a dream. I was an old woman sitting on a bench near the wisteria arbor. A young couple walked by, their hands clasped. They were lost in their own world, and the garden was their sanctuary. It was for them, I realized, for all the lovers yet to come. It is this feeling I must build." She let the words hang in the silent room. She was not reciting a fact, she was delivering a testimony. That is the practical value of this plan, councilwoman. We are not just building a park. We are building a feeling. The bluestone you see as an expense is the foundation for a first kiss. The wisteria arbor you see as a pile of rotten wood is the shelter for a marriage proposal. The gentle surprises in the landscape are the backdrop for a child's first discovery of the magic of nature. She turned her attention to the donors. You are being asked to invest not just in infrastructure, but in the city's heart. Do you want your legacy to be a plaque on a competent, forgettable park made of cheap concrete? Or do you want to be the people who gave this city back its sanctuary? A place that will host first dates and 50-year anniversaries and quiet moments of peace for generations to come. She then spoke of Mrs. Gable, her voice softening. There is a woman who plays tennis against a crumbling wall in that garden. She is 87 years old. Her father taught her to play in that exact spot. Her mother planted the pansies nearby. Her memories are part of the soil. Our plan does not tear down her wall. It rebuilds it. It honors her memories and makes space for new ones. That is the function of this design. It connects the past to the future. It gives our city a story. She finished, her chest heaving, her heart pounding with a fierce, terrifying adrenaline. The room was utterly silent. She had laid her soul, and Eleanor Vance's soul, bare for them to judge. She risked a glance at Liam. He was staring at her, his eyes wide with an expression of stunned, profound admiration. The cautious developer was gone, and in his place was the man from the garden, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. Inspired, transformed by her courage, Liam stepped forward. He did not look at his notes. He looked at the council, but he spoke to her. "She is right," he said, his voice resonating with a newfound passion. "I began this process as a developer. I looked at this project as a problem of budgets and materials. I was wrong. Elara Sterling took me into the archive, and she took me into the garden, and she showed me the ghost of what this place was, and the heart of what it can be." He turned to Miller. "Councilwoman, the plan I started to present to you was a compromise. It was a safe plan. But it was not the right plan. This one is." He tapped the watercolor rendering. "This plan has a story. It has a soul. And yes, it will cost more. Because quality costs more. Because beauty costs more. Because building a legacy and not just a park costs more. But I believe, and I now know that Elara believes, that it is an investment the city cannot afford not to make." He and Elara stood side by side, a united, formidable front. They fielded the questions that followed not as developer and archivist, but as a single cohesive team. He would explain the structural advantages of a certain design, and she would explain the emotional resonance behind it. Their chemistry, which they had tried so hard to suppress, was now on full display, a powerful persuasive force. When it was over, The outcome was still uncertain. Councilwoman Miller looked apoplectic, but several other council members, and more than one of the donors, were looking at the plan with a new, thoughtful expression. They had been given a choice, not between two budgets, but between two visions. They packed up in a blur. Mr. Albright rushed over, his face flushed with a combination of terror and excitement. "I do not know what just happened in there," he stammered, "but it was magnificent." Elara and Liam did not speak until they were outside the chamber, alone in the long, sterile corridor. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a humming, nervous energy. The professional roles were gone, obliterated by the emotional battle they had just waged together. There was nothing left to hide behind. Liam put the presentation board down, leaning it against the wall. He turned to her, his face serious, his eyes searching hers. "Thank you" is not the right word, he began, his voice low and raw. "I could not let them destroy it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "No, not that," he said, taking a step closer. "Thank you for showing me who you are. The woman who just spoke in that room, that is the woman I met in the garden. The woman I have been trying and failing to keep at a professional distance all week." He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "I was a fool, Elara. I was so terrified of this feeling between us. I thought it would compromise the project, that it would be a distraction. I tried to put it in a box, to draw a line. But I was wrong. It is not a distraction. It is the source of everything. Your passion, your fire, that is what saved this project. That is what saved me in there." He took another step, closing the space between them. He gently reached up and loosened the tight bun in her hair, his fingers threading through the strands, letting them fall around her shoulders. It was an act of profound intimacy, an undoing of the armor she had put on that morning. "I do not want the archivist," he whispered, his hand coming to rest on her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "I do not want the professional partner. I want you." And then he kissed her. It was nothing like the gentle, hesitant kiss that had almost happened in the twilight garden. This was a kiss born of adrenaline and relief, of fear and triumph. It was hungry, desperate, a release of a week's worth of unspoken tension. His lips were firm and demanding against hers, and she met his intensity with her own, her hands coming up to grip his lapels as if she were afraid he might disappear. It was a kiss that broke all the rules, that shattered every boundary. It was unprofessional and illogical, and it was the most honest thing either of them had done all week. In the cold, impersonal hallway of City Hall, surrounded by the ghosts of their recent battle, they finally found the sanctuary they had been fighting for. And in that kiss, a new story, their story, finally truly began. The kiss ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving them breathless in the sterile silence of the hallway. They pulled apart, but only by inches, the energy still crackling between them. Elara's hands were still clutching the lapels of his suit jacket, her knuckles white. His hand was still tangled in her hair, his thumb resting gently against her cheek. They stared at each other, their chests rising and falling in unison, the shared adrenaline of the presentation slowly giving way to the profound, terrifying intimacy of what had just happened. Liam was the first to speak, his voice a low, rough whisper. "I am so sorry, Elara." Her heart plummeted. He was apologizing. He was taking it back. The boundary was being rebuilt before her very eyes. She let go of his jacket, her hands falling to her sides as she prepared to retreat. "No," he said quickly, seeing the change in her expression. He did not move his hand from her hair, keeping her there, keeping her from pulling away. "Not for that, never for that. I am sorry for being a coward, for trying to pretend this was not happening, for making you think, even for a second, that your passion was anything other than the most incredible thing I have ever seen." Relief washed over her, so potent and immediate it almost buckled her knees. He was not taking it back. He was stepping over the line he had drawn and erasing it completely. "I was so afraid," she confessed, her own voice barely audible. I am not used to this, to fighting, to feeling this much." "Me neither," he admitted, a small, wry smile touching his lips. "I build things with steel and glass, things that are supposed to be predictable. There is nothing predictable about the way I feel when I am with you." They stood there for a long moment, simply looking at each other, letting the truth of their new reality settle. The anger and the fear from the presentation room had burned away the last of their pretenses, leaving behind something raw and fragile and undeniably real. The city council chamber was just down the hall, but it felt a million miles away. "What happens now?" Elara asked, the question encompassing everything. The project, them. "Now," Liam said, his gaze serious and unwavering. "We go get a cup of the worst coffee in the city from that vending machine downstairs, and we wait. Together." He finally let his hand drop from her hair, but he immediately captured her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. His palm was warm and strong, and she held on tight. "Whatever they decide in that room, we face it together. Deal?" "Deal," she said. And for the first time, the future did not feel like a threat to the past, but like a hopeful, open-ended question. The coffee was, as predicted, terrible. They sat on a hard bench in the cavernous, empty lobby of City Hall, the presentation board leaning against the wall beside them like a silent witness. The world outside the grand glass doors was moving on, cars rushing past, pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalk. But inside, time seemed to be suspended. "I really thought you were going to let her win," Elara said quietly, staring into her styrofoam cup. "When you started talking about cost-effective alternatives, it felt like you were giving up." Liam sighed, shaking his head. "I was. I walked in there ready to sacrifice the soul of the project to get it passed. That is what I have always done. You compromise, you make concessions, you get the thing built. That is the job." He turned to her, his expression earnest. "But then you stood up. You did not talk about materials or budgets. You talked about lovers and memories and old women who play tennis. You reminded me what we were actually fighting for. You were not just defending a garden, Elara. You were defending the very idea that beauty and memory have value. You made me want to be a better architect, a better man." Tears pricked at Elara's eyes. For so long, her passion had been a quiet, solitary thing, a treasure she guarded in the silent depths of her archive. To see it reflected back at her, not as a strange obsession but as a source of strength and inspiration, was overwhelming. "And you," she said, her voice thick, "you showed me that the past does not have to be sealed under glass. It can be a foundation for something new, that it can live and breathe again." He squeezed her hand. "We make a good team." It was a simple statement, but it held the weight of everything they had been through. They had started as adversaries, become reluctant colleagues, then true partners. And now they were something more. They waited for nearly 2 hours. They talked in low voices, not about the project, but about everything else. Favorite books, childhood memories, dreams they had never told anyone. With every shared story, the space between them filled with a comfortable, easy intimacy. The charged, desperate energy of the kiss in the hallway was softening into the warm, steady glow of genuine connection. Finally, Liam's phone buzzed. They both jumped. The caller ID read Albright. Liam's face went grim. He took a deep breath, met Elara's wide, anxious eyes, and answered the call. Albright. Yes. I see. And the bluestone. She did. And the arbor. Okay. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. He hung up the phone, his expression unreadable. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She braced herself for the worst. They are making us use the concrete pavers, are they not? She asked, her voice small. A slow smile spread across Liam's face, a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. They approved it, he said, his voice quiet with disbelief. They approved the whole thing. What? She gasped. Your speech. It worked. One of the donors, the head of a major local foundation, was so moved by the story of Eleanor Vance that he offered to fund the Bluestone Plaza himself, on the condition that it be named the Vance Plaza. Miller could not argue with that. He started to laugh, a deep, joyous sound that echoed in the empty lobby. And Mrs. Gable is getting her wall rebuilt. They approved the pansy patch, the arbor, all of it. We won, Elara. We actually won. Elara stared at him, the news slowly sinking in. Tears streamed down her face now, but they were tears of shock and overwhelming joy. He pulled her to her feet and wrapped her in a fierce hug, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. She laughed through her tears, burying her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him. He set her down but did not let her go. He framed her face with his hands, his eyes shining. We did it, he whispered. We did it, she echoed, and he kissed her again. This kiss was different from the first. It was not desperate or hungry. It was slow and deep and full of a profound shared joy. It was the kiss of a beginning, a promise of all the walks in the garden yet to come. 1 year later, on a perfect afternoon in late May, the Centennial Garden was officially reopened. The day was warm, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The garden was teeming with life, just as Eleanor Vance had dreamed. Music from a string quartet drifted from the new amphitheatre. Children's laughter spilled from Mrs. Gable's pansy patch, and the scent of lilacs and roses hung heavy in the air. Elara stood with Liam on the edge of the Vance Plaza. The bluestone under her feet was a deep, satisfying grey, still damp from the morning sprinklers. The fountain at its centre gurgled merrily, its water sparkling in the sun. In the distance, she could see the new wisteria arbour, a sturdy structure of reclaimed oak, already draped in the vibrant green leaves of the ancient surviving vine. It was all real. They had done it. It is more beautiful than the watercolours, she said, her voice filled with awe. Liam slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "That is because it is alive," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It has a heart now." He was no longer the sharp-edged developer in a suit. He was dressed in jeans and a soft linen shirt, looking completely at home in the world he had helped to rebuild. Elara, too, was transformed. She wore a simple, light blue sundress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was no longer a guardian hiding in the shadows of the past. She was standing in the bright sunlight of a present she had helped create. They watched as Mrs. Gable, holding court by her newly reinforced brick wall, showed a young girl how to properly grip a tennis racket. They saw Mr. Albright beaming with pride, accepting congratulations from the mayor. They saw couples, young and old, walking hand in hand down the ribbons of retreat. The garden was working its magic already, weaving its story into the lives of a new generation. "She would be proud," Elara said quietly. "She is," Liam replied, his gaze soft as he looked at her. He led her by the hand away from the crowds, down a familiar winding path. They walked past the grove of birch trees, their white bark glowing in the afternoon light, and came to the stone bench, now cleared of ivy, that offered a perfect view of the setting sun. They sat down, the stone warm beneath them. For a few minutes, they were silent, simply absorbing the peace of the place. "Do you remember the first day we came here?" Liam asked, taking her hand. "It felt like a ghost." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, turning to face her, his eyes full of a deep and abiding love. "It feels like home." "You feel like home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Elara's breath caught in her throat. He opened it, and inside sat a simple, elegant ring. It was not a diamond, but a small, polished piece of bluestone, the exact colour of his eyes when they changed in the light, set in a delicate silver band that was shaped like two intertwined vines. "I know a place is not a person," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But this place is where I found you. It is where I figured out what was truly important. It is the heart of our story." Elara Sterling. "Would you be willing to start building a future with me, right here?" Tears of pure happiness welled in her eyes as she looked from his earnest, hopeful face to the impossible, beautiful ring. She thought of the woman who had hidden herself away in an archive, who believed her life was meant to be lived among silent ghosts. And she thought of the man who had stormed into that life, who had challenged her and seen her, and who had, with his relentless passion and surprising heart, led her out into the sun. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit, and as he leaned in to kiss her, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees above them, carrying the scent of wisteria and the sound of distant laughter. It felt like a blessing, a quiet sigh of approval from the ghost of a woman who had once dreamed of lovers in a garden, and who had, in the end, brought two hearts together to create a sanctuary all their own.